Hi, Miss Yates. I'm Jordan Jones.
Hi, Jordan.
And
I'm Kate Reese.
And we're elementary education majors. And we're just going to kind of talk a little bit and ask a couple of questions. Mainly, will you? Sorry. You can set it on the green thing. Yeah, that's perfect. There we go. Okay, I'm sorry.
No.
We're just going to ask a couple questions kind of directed towards special education, IEP, and things like that. So,
Okay.
First question, how would you define what special education means?
Special education, what does that mean? That your education is specially tailored to fit your needs.
Okay.
And that's a luxury.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, how long have you been a special education teacher?
This would be my second year.
Okay. And how did you decide that you wanted to do it?
I love children, and I believe that each one of us should be able to work as an individual and appreciated to work at their level. I love watching them learn and helping them get through the process to accomplish whatever it is they need to.
Yeah,
Come on.
absolutely.
I've always enjoyed, I guess, the underdog maybe.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the most common disabilities of special needs students that you have seen?
Specific learning disabilities, probably the most, the SLDs.
Okay.
Okay. Who all is involved in the process of making an IEP? Here at Clarksville Primary.
The parents, the classroom teacher, the special education teacher. If they need speech, then the speech language path would be involved, and that would be it. Those are the people that make it.
Okay. So how much time goes into a child's IEP, and how long would they have it for?
It depends upon, quite a bit of time goes into the planning of it, to the goals.
Mm-hmm.
But the time that you spend on creating it is going to depend upon how many subjects the child qualifies for and all of the, whatever the disability is.
Mm-hmm.
It will vary from an hour to make the IEP.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we come together as the committee, it's presented in a rough draft form, so if there's any questions or anything that, the parent feels, this should be different, or they think so we can fix it and work it to where we're all in agreement.
Right.
So it just varies depending on how many goals and objectives that you would have.
Okay. So along with how long it takes to develop an IEP, how much paperwork would you say that there goes into making an IEP during the process? Is there a lot of
Well, there is a lot of paperwork, but the state is doing a reduction in paperwork. So I would say how many pages?
just a length, I guess how many pages? Yeah.
And depending upon the goals and the objectives, and if speech language is involved, and then you have OT and PT, that will depend. I mean, you could have an IEP that would be 30 pages in length, or one that's 20 pages. It would just depend upon the
all
goal.
of this. Okay. So as you they'll have it for a year, I guess, and then they'll have to get reevaluated. Do you get reevaluated yearly, or is it
Every year we have an annual review, and that's where we do an annual review, what they have done that year. The goals that they have mastered, the goals that they have not mastered. If they've mastered these goals, then we'll continue to work on these. Do I need to touch that so it's still?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. And the annual review is when we would sit down with the parents and go over, these the progress that's being made and any progress that isn't made. addressing that. They would be reevaluated every 3 years.
Okay.
So,
like, how long would that reevaluation process be? Like, what does that entail? Do they just, is it kind of like the beginning evaluation, like the very first, or is it?
Yes, like if
so you start over from the beginning again.
Well, they'll have the school psychology exam. Okay, she'll come in and she'll do her part for the IQ and the achievement, and then if that student is in speech, receiving services there, then
they'll come in.
So then the 60 days, to get the testing done, and then to call the parents in to go over the results of that. So I mean, you have
several months.
Yeah, several months. I mean, you have your 60 days, and then after that, you have your 30 days to go over the results.
Okay.
So, in your 2 years that you've been a special education teacher, how many IEPs do you think have you made? Many.
Oh gosh, 20 at least.
Okay.
If not more.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you see these children every day?
I do.
You do? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, as a gen ed teacher, how would you suggest that I become involved in a child's IEP process?
What do you mean?
Like, besides from the fact that, obviously the gen ed teacher is going to be the one that's, seeing these things and is going to, do the RTI process and, referral and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout it, we're going to be giving our side, anecdotal side of what we've seen. How are we involved in that process?
Well, when the general education teacher makes that referral and fills out the referral packet and all the information that's needed to complete that.
Is that really the end of it on the gen ed side?
You'll be involved at the meeting, the eval programming, when we sit down and we discuss the IEPs. These are the goals and these are the objectives. You will be a part of that. You'll be able to say, oh yes, that makes sense. I agree with that. Or I have noticed that he does better if he sits close, with the accommodations, the modifications, preferential seating, shortened assignments, stuff like that.
Okay.
So that's where you would be.
The classroom side of it. Okay.
Okay, so we've talked about the parental involvement in the making of the child's IEP. So do you think that they should be more involved or less involved within that process? Do you think there's some parents that are overly involved? Do you think there's some that should be more involved? I mean, I know it differs between the child, but just based on your experience.
I think any time that you have parent involvement is a wonderful opportunity to embrace. I think that the more positive relationships you can build with those parents. Now, look, I think we all get it when it comes to the IEP, the writing the goals and the objectives. The parents probably are not going to be as familiar with that as someone who works in that field. But I think it's important that you explain to the parents why why you're doing this, and that's part of going over the results of the evaluation. I think that parents should be involved to help. They'll know what we're working on, and then they get their progress on how we're doing. But I think it's important for them to be involved. And I think it's the same as a general ed classroom. The more your parents are involved, you can tell in your students' outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the more you can embrace that opportunity to build a relationship, because when you have a good working relationship, they trust you, and you want that because you have their child's best interests at heart. So I think that they are probably involved enough.
Yes.
But I think that it always should be encouraged.
Yes.
Right.
Oh dear, I didn't get
Oh
it
goodness,
quickly.
I can get it. You're fine.
So
It's still going.
As a parent, have you ever had an instance where the parent was like not supportive of the child being placed or was not wanting to acknowledge the fact, like what do you do in that situation?
I've never had that happen. They would just not sign the consent, so we wouldn't be able to. And they have every right to refuse that.
Right.
So, and I've never had it happen.
Okay, so what do students have to do or go through in order to be eligible for an IEP? What is their part?
Okay, there will be a referral made, and then after the referral is made, will the parents come in and agree to them to be tested. After they're tested, the results of those evaluations will tell us whether it will tell us if we're working with a student that would benefit from special ed services.
Why do you think it's so important to diagnose at such a young age?
I think the sooner you start that process, the learning process with a child, because they are a sponge, and just to be exposed to things and to routines, not just the letters and the numbers and the sounds, but the routine and the organization of school. I just think they're sponges. They'll just soak it,
everything.
Because I think the older we become, the more ingrained this. We've learned it this way. It's kind of like the kindergarten students that come that have never been enrolled or involved with a preschool program. They have no idea that they really do have to sit when they're told to sit, and they do have to stay with the line. They can't just go. So I think it benefits everybody, including the child, of course.
Right.
Okay, so you said that she asked about the specific learning disabilities, and that's what you've seen the most in your IEPs. So what do you think, which specific learning disability that you've written the most IEPs for? Like, do you know?
It's just specific learning disability.
Okay.
It's not going to be like dysgraphia or or dyslexic. It's not going to. It's just going to be a specific learning disability because there's the deviation to achievement test, and then the IQ test because of the scoring.
Right. Okay. So, as a gen ed teacher, how would I know if a special education student was learning as much as the other students in the classroom? Like, how would I be able to make sure that that was happening?
Well, their IEP goals and their accommodations, depending upon how much time they come to resource. If they come to me for 600 minutes, then I am responsible for the grade. But you'll see that they're flourishing and excelling because when they are in your classroom, they'll be competing at their level, doing the best that they can.
So those accommodations and the goals are put in place for like the inclusion, like in the general education classroom. And so whenever you are writing those, it's kind of with that in mind, like these are the things that the gen ed teacher is going to need to do to make sure that this student is learning like with the best of their ability. Okay.
I think it's huge that general education teachers need to understand, and I think they do understand. I think it's a choice. Just because that child is in special ed and receives those services, they are still part of your classroom and they need to be included, not just, they go to resource, so
absolutely.
we're done. That's why those modifications and accommodations are so important.
Absolutely.
Do you want to stop? Have we finished?
We have like 5 minutes left.
Her class is...
Okay.
Can we time out? We're gonna move rooms.
I want to finish in here, and let's wait just a minute.
Are you okay with that?
Okay.
5 minutes.
Time in.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. So, like, basing off that, like, about the accommodations, modifications, and things like that, what would you suggest when it comes to talking with your students like in the general education classroom that haven't been placed in special education services, and like maybe their parents or something like that about the inclusion process, because in one of my hosts classes there was like an issue with that and their parents, and like wanting to make sure that their child wasn't being slighted, and like obviously as a general education class or teacher, like that was something that I was like, why would that be an issue? But you might run into that. Like what is your advice whenever something like that happens?
That their child was a special...
No, their child was in the general education and hasn't been placed in special education. And there was one that had been placed in the classroom, and they wanted to make sure their child wasn't being slighted in any way.
Because they were involved with that. Well, first of all, there is a the confidentiality of it.
Right.
No class, no parent, no one should be able to go in and say, "Oh, they're special ed. They go to Miss Shades."
Yeah.
That's you know what I mean.
Know.
Yeah.
No one should know that, and
Right,
shame
absolutely.
on them for that. Because now, yes, I understand some disabilities. Yes, they will be very apparent.
Right.
But for a parent to do that,
Inappropriate.
that's very inappropriate.
No. Yeah, I
very
agree.
inappropriate
No, yeah.
because, and I would just question the confidentiality that's been in place there, because you will not know who my students are. That's how good they are.
So, why do you think it is important that students with learning disabilities and IEPs be placed within the general education classroom? Like, how is it beneficial to them?
Because they are people, just like us. They learn at a different rate. They may be a little different. I tend to think all best people are. But they are people. They are going to be productive members of society. They're not any different than anybody else. They just learn differently. And they should have every opportunity.
Absolutely.
They're still preparing for the future like everybody
They
else.
should. And to be real honest, I think for the people that are like, well, you know, special ed, you would be surprised how many people are working and living productive lives that you'd never know. You would never know. And that's the thing. They're normal people that are leading productive lives. Now, yes, depending upon the severity, but I think that we all deserve a chance. And we deserve a good chance. And we deserve people that will fight for us to have that.
Absolutely.
Does that answer that?
Yes. Perfectly.
In your opinion, do students who live in poverty get placed in special education services more?
Yes. I would say that might be, yes.
Is that an appropriate placement, or is that just a factor in?
I think it's a factor. I think because of the situations and circumstance of poverty, not necessarily always, but I do think that the less advantaged, they're just, and it's not their fault.
Right, no.
So.
Yeah. So, like we were talking about before, about how that confidentiality is in place, and I mean, I obviously totally agree that was a very interesting circumstance. But who else does get that information in school? Like, do like the lunch ladies or like the duty teachers, like that aren't like a classroom teacher or anything? Like, no one else knows that besides the classroom teacher and then
you.
Like the music, library,
right? Yeah.
All the special teachers, they know, and they only have, they only know the accommodations and the modifications.
Right.
They don't have access to their IEPs or anything like that, just the accommodations.
Right.
If they have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Right,
That's
just
what
to
I think.
help with that, you know, like including them in that class, just to help them in that way.
Yes, they'll know ahead of time, this is my student. These are the accommodations and modifications that are in place that you need to be aware of that you're doing.
And my last question is just, in your opinion, is inclusive classrooms and differentiated instruction like different or the same? Like how, in your opinion, how do they differ?
I don't know that I can answer that in a quick answer. I think they're different, but I think they're the same.
Okay. So, like, in an inclusive classroom, obviously you're going to have those students.
Right.
And in differentiated instruction, it will be the same because you're kind of modifying the way and accommodating for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that way, they're the same. But, like, differently, like, are there going to be students that, like, we only have for, like, maybe an hour a day or something like that? Like, is that going to be something that happens? And then that way, like, that would only be, like, for a certain lesson or something like that? I don't know if that makes sense. I kind of feel like I was rambling on that question.
You only have them for a
like,
certain amount of time.
Yeah.
As the general education teacher.
It just would depend on how many minutes they come to resource.
Okay.
You're not talking about the teacher coming to be that did that again.
I know.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to
No, you're fine.
So, like, if they're in resource for more time than they are in the general education classroom, you know, like, what I'm asking is, like, what kind of part of the day are they going to be in there for? Is it going to be, like, literacy or, like, math or anything like that?
It will depend on what they qualify for,
Okay.
service-wise. If they qualify for reading, math, and writing with me, then they'll be with me for those subjects, and they'll be in your room for science, social study, or anything that's extra.
Okay.
Because we don't. I mean,
so you would differentiate for that part, but it wouldn't be necessarily for the others since they would be with you.
But you're going to differentiate for all of your students,
Right.
not just.
Yes. Right.
I'm sorry.
I guess I was just asking, like, if you have them, like, for a certain amount of the day, like, for that part of the day, like, if they're with you for...
You won't make up that time with them in your room. Is that what you're...
Yeah.
Right. No, that will be that's my responsibility.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think that's all of our questions.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so
You're
much.
very welcome. I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
And thanks for letting us use your room.
Thank you.